To flag records for President Trump?
To flag any records which included his name.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you, Senator.
Eventually, you're going to have to answer for your conduct in this. And you won't do it today. But
this may look like a tense exchange over missing documents, but it's actually a stress test of institutional transparency. What's really being tested here is whether federal oversight still functions when politically sensitive names enter the record. This raises broader questions about who controls information, who decides what the public is allowed to know, and how accountability erodes when answers are withheld. In this video, we'll break down how a single refusal reveals deeper fractures between power, process, and public trust.
Not answered. In February, you made a public claim that the Epstein client list was, quote, sitting on my desk right now for review, end of quote. You then produced already public information and no client list at a major media event hosted at the White House. Attorney General Bondi, why did you publicly claim to have the Epstein client list waiting for your review and then produce nothing relevant to that claim?
Senator Durbin, if you listen to my entire clip on that, I said I had not reviewed it yet, that it was sitting on my desk along with the JFK files, the Martin Luther King files, and I said I had not yet reviewed it. And if you see our memo on Epstein, you will see, our memo on Epstein clearly points out that there was no client list, our July 6th memo. You also didn't let me respond to the HIDTA question. The budget transfers $196 million for high-intensity drug trafficking areas to the Office of Justice Programs, OJP. The Justice Department will continue to administer those grants under OJP in 2026.
Going back to the Epstein files, according to another whistleblower who made a protected disclosure to my office, you pushed the FBI to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records on an arbitrarily short deadline in March, and the FBI was directed to flag any documents that mentioned President Trump. Nothing came of that review until July when DOJ and FBI released an unsigned memo stating, quote, there's no incriminating client list. Why was the July 7th memo unsigned?
The July 7th memo came from the FBI and the Department of Justice. Director Patel answered those questions very clear. And, you know, Senator Durbin, I find it very interesting that you refused repeated Republican requests to release the Epstein flight logs in 2023 and 2024. You fought that. Did you take money from Reid Hoffman, campaign donations, who was a huge Epstein friend? Why did you fight for years? Why did you fight to not disclose the flight logs, Senator Durbin?
I can tell you I did not refuse. One of the senators here wished to produce those logs, and I asked her to put it in writing, and she never did.
Yeah, I think Senator Blackburn would quarrel with you on that.
Well, I will quarrel with you as to Reid, somebody that you mentioned I never heard of.
Reid Hoffman.
So who gave the order to flag records related to President Trump?
To flag records for President Trump?
To flag any records which included his name.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you, Senator.
Eventually, you're going to have to answer for your conduct in this, and you won't do it today, but eventually you will. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
The moment hangs in the air as Senator Dick Durbin yields the floor, not with answers, but with a warning. A warning that feels less like a conclusion and more like an unresolved charge. Just seconds earlier, what began as a familiar line of questioning turned sharply on its head. Pam Bondi did not retreat. She did not deflect. Instead, she flipped the script, redirecting scrutiny back toward the very institution demanding explanations from her. And in that exchange, the hearing revealed far more than a dispute over documents. It exposed the uneasy tension between power and accountability in modern Washington. Durbin's accusation was precise and deliberate. He pointed to a public statement, a claim that sensitive files sat on Bondi's desk awaiting review. He framed it as a broken promise, a moment where expectation collided with disappointment. But Bondi's response cut through the framing. She reminded the room and the record that context matters, that words matter, that she had never claimed review had been completed, only that materials existed among others of historic significance. And more importantly, she pointed to what the official findings actually said, that there was no list matching the narrative so often repeated outside these walls. What followed was not just disagreement, it was confrontation. Bondi challenged the premise of the question itself, drawing attention to past decisions by the Senate, to years of resistance when transparency was politically inconvenient. She named names. She referenced refusals. She forced the spotlight to shift from the executive branch back onto the legislative one. In that instant, the hearing stopped being about one memo or one deadline. It became a mirror held up to the system itself. This is how power operates in Washington. Questions are rarely neutral. Accusations are rarely isolated. Every inquiry carries history with it: past votes, past denials, past alliances. When Bondi asked why certain records were blocked for years, she wasn't just defending herself, she was exposing a pattern where outrage arrives late, after political winds have changed, after responsibility can be safely redistributed. Durbin pressed again, invoking whistleblowers, timelines, unsigned memos. He demanded clarity, certainty, a name behind the order. But Bondi drew a line. There are moments in government where transparency meets process, and not every demand is answered in real time, on camera, under pressure. Her refusal to elaborate was not a collapse. It was a reminder that oversight does not grant omniscience, and hearings do not replace law. And yet, the frustration in the room was real. Because Americans watching this exchange don't just want procedural explanations. They want trust. They want consistency. They want to believe that the same standards apply regardless of party, power, or proximity. When Durbin warned that Bondi would eventually have to answer, he was speaking to a deeper anxiety, that too often answers arrive slowly, selectively, or not at all. This is the moral tension at the heart of the moment. A government built on checks and balances cannot function if those checks are wielded as weapons rather than tools. Oversight must illuminate, not obscure. Accountability must be even-handed, not strategic. When senators block disclosures one year and demand them the next, the public notices. When officials are accused based on headlines rather than findings, credibility erodes. What this hearing ultimately revealed is not a single failure or a single defense, but a system struggling with its own reflection. A system where truth competes with narrative, where responsibility is shared, but blame is often outsourced, where every side claims the moral high ground, yet few are willing to acknowledge their own footprints in the past. Pam Bondi's challenge to Dick Durbin was not just personal, it was institutional. It asked a simple but uncomfortable question: who decides when transparency is urgent and when it can wait? Who controls the flow of information, and who benefits from its delay? These are not partisan questions. They are democratic ones. As the gavel moves on and the cameras fade, what remains is the unresolved weight of that exchange, not the shouting. Not the accusations, but the reminder that accountability cannot be selective if it is to mean anything at all. That justice, to remain credible, must be applied consistently, even when it is inconvenient, even when it turns the lens inward. In a moment where rhetoric often replaces reflection, this hearing offered something rarer, a glimpse into the machinery of power, grinding loudly, imperfectly, under public scrutiny. And it left viewers with a choice: to accept surface-level answers, or to demand deeper honesty from every corner of government. If you believe transparency should never depend on politics, if you believe accountability must apply to everyone equally, then stay engaged. Support independent scrutiny. And subscribe to Liberty Report USA and Because the Truth Doesn't Defend Itself.